Good evening. It is currently 11:18 p.m. on the eve of another test. This is going to be the chapters 1 through 3 review of the Cengage Microsoft Exam AZ-800 a Guide to Administering Windows Server Hybrid Core Infrastructure by Greg Comshaw. This is a networking book. I just kind of included the web page for this. From the Cengage people, just so that you can see that it exists and that it's an actual book. Let's shut that down. Boom, and we're gonna make me larger. Boom. All right. Like previously, I am going to be reading the chapter kind of synopsis, summary, and then the kind of guided questions that it's sprinkled throughout. So we're going to get started here. Module 1, which is dive into Windows Server Hybrid Infrastructure. Get this moved a bit. Sure we're all set. All right, module summary for Module 1, dive into Windows Server Hybrid Infrastructure. The server is largely defined by the software running on the computer hardware rather than the computer hardware on which the software is running. Although most client OSs now provide some server services, such as file and printer sharing, a true server OS is usually defined as providing these important network services: directory services, DNS, remote access, DHCP, and robust network application services. In addition, current server OSs include hardware support for multiple processors, disk fault tolerance, and clustering. Windows Server 2022 includes more than a dozen primary server roles and many supporting role services and features. Administrators can configure a server as a narrowly focused device provides just one or two specific services, or as a general do-it-all system that's the center of a Windows network. The technologies that make up the core functions of Windows Server 2022 include Server Manager, NTFS, the Microsoft Management Console, otherwise known as the MMC, disk management, file and printer sharing, Windows networking, Active Directory, PowerShell, Hyper-V, and storage spaces. The Windows Server Hybrid Infrastructure is the Microsoft paradigm for the hybrid cloud. Cloud computing is scalable, agile, and current. Cloud models include SaaS, service as a, software as a service, PaaS, platform as a service, and IaaS, infrastructure as a service. The focus of Microsoft Azure and the hybrid infrastructure is IaaS, infrastructure as a service. You can create a free Azure account or a student account to work with Azure resources for free. You can create a VM with Windows Server 2022 already installed and access it using RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol. Solutions to self-check questions. The role of a server operating system. When Windows Server 2022 is installed on a computer, the computer's role in a network is always as a server. True or false? That is false. While Windows Server 2022 is designed as a server operating system, what matters most is how it is used and the software that is installed on it. A user could install Windows Server 2022 and use it as a general purpose client computer by installing Office productivity software, games, and other user or client oriented software. Windows Server 2022 core technologies. Which of the following is a server role that is pre-installed on Windows Server 2022? File and storage services. Only file and storage services is a server role that is installed by default on Windows Server 2022, while PowerShell is installed by default. It is not a server role. Active Directory domain services and Hyper-V are roles that must be installed manually after Windows Server 2022 is installed. Which of the following is considered network server software that is pre-installed on Windows Server 2022? The answer is file and printer sharing for Microsoft Windows. Only file and printer sharing for Microsoft Windows is considered network server software. Client for Microsoft Networks is client software. Transport Control Protocol I Internet Protocol is the primary networking protocol that client and server software run on. A network interface driver is a software component that communicates with the NIC network interface card to read and write network data from and to the media. Introducing the Windows Server hybrid infrastructure, such as which as a service technology best describes the focus of Microsoft Azure, IaaS, infrastructure as a service. While Microsoft Azure can be used to perform other as-a-service technologies, its main focus is on infrastructure as a service, in which users can deploy virtual machines, run infrastructure, networking services like Active Directory and DNS, and deploy virtual networks. What protocol is enabled by default on an Azure VM and allows a user to access the VM console via a public IP address, that is RDP. Remote Desktop Protocol is enabled by default on a new Azure VM that runs Windows Server 2022, and it can be accessed by public IP address. However, you can disable it if you prefer for security reasons. And now we move on to Module 2, Discover Active Directory. You don't discover Active Directory. Active Directory discovers you. A directory service is a database that stores network resource information and can be used to manage users, computers, and resources throughout the network. A directory service provides network single sign-on for users and centralizes management in geographically dispersed networks. Active Directory is based on the X.500 standard, and LDAP Active Directory is the Windows Directory Service and has been part of the Windows Server family since Windows Server 2000. Active Directory is a hierarchical, distributed database that's scalable, secure, and flexible. Active Directory's physical structure is composed of sites and domain controllers. The logical structure is composed of organizational units, domains, trees, and forests. You use Server Manager to install the Active Directory domain services role. After running the wizard in Server Manager, you must finish the Active Directory installation by promoting the server to a domain controller using the Active Directory Domain Services Configuration Wizard. After Active Directory is installed, a number of new MMCs are added into the Administrative Tools folder. The main tools for managing an Active Directory domain are Active Directory Administrative Center and Active Directory Users and Computers. Installing the first DC in a network creates a new forest, and the domain is called forest root domain. Adding domain controllers to a domain or new domains in a forest is similar to creating a new forest. You can use install from media IFM to install subsequent DCs in a domain. Using IFM reduces the amount of initial replication traffic required to bring the new DC up to date. The data in Active Directory is organized as objects. Available objects and their structure are defined by the Active Directory schema, which is composed of schema classes and schema attributes. The data in a schema attribute is called an attribute value. There are two types of objects in Active Directory: container objects and leaf objects. Container objects contain other objects and include domains, folders, and OUs. OUs are the primary organizing container in Active Directory. Domains represent administrative, security, and policy boundaries. OUs are organizing and management containers mainly used to mimic a company structure and apply group policies to collections of users or computers. Leaf objects generally represent security accounts, network resources, and GPOs. Security accounts include users, groups, and computers. There are three categories of user account objects: local user accounts, domain user accounts, and built-in user accounts. Groups are used to assign rights and permissions to collections of users. Computer accounts, computer account objects are used to identify computers that are domain members. Other leaf objects include contacts, printers, and shared folders. The AD recycle bin can be enabled in ADAC, but once enabled, it cannot be disabled. The recycle bin feature requires a forest functional level of at least Windows Server 2008 R2. You have to delete Active Directory to get rid of it, and that goes to all domain controllers. Active Directory objects can be located easily with search functions in Active Directory users and computers and Windows Explorer. Users can use the Active Directory search function to find network resources such as shared printers and folders, other users, contacts, and many other items. Large organizations might require multiple domains, trees, and forests. Some terms for describing the Active Directory structure include directory partitions, operation master roles, Active Directory replication, and trust relationships. Directory partitions are sections of the Active Directory database that hold varied types of data and are managed by different processes. Directory partitions can be replicated from one domain controller to another. FSMO roles are functions carried out by a single domain controller per domain or forest. They perform vital functions that affect Active Directory operations. The forest is the broadcast logical Active Directory component, broadest logical Active Directory component. All domains in a forest share some common characteristics, such as a common schema, the global catalog, and trust between domains. The global catalog facilitates several important functions, such as cross-domain logon and forest-wide searching. The forest root domain is the first domain created in a forest. A domain is the primary identifying and administrative unit of Active Directory. Each domain has a unique name, and there's an administrative account with full control over objects in the domain. Some organizations can benefit by using multiple domains when different security or account policies are required. Among other reasons, a tree consists of one or more domains with a Contiguous namespace. An Active Directory forest might require multiple trees when an organization is composed of companies with a non-contiguous namespace. GPOs are lists of settings that enable administrators to configure user and computer operating environments remotely. GPOs have two main nodes: computer configuration and user configuration. Each node contains a policies folder and a preferences folder. Under the policies folder are three additional folders called software settings, Windows settings, and administrative templates. Policies defined in the computer configuration node affect all computers in the Active Directory container to which the GPO is linked. Policies defined in the user configuration node affect all users in the Active Directory container to which the GPO is linked. Group objects aren't affected by GPOs. GPOs can be applied in the following four places in the following order: the local computer, site, domain, and OU. User policies are applied when a user signs in, and computer policies are applied when a computer restarts. You go through a couple of the Module 2's acronyms. So we have ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services, DSRM, Directory Services Restore Mode, FQDN, Fully Qualified Domain Name, Flexible Single Master Operation, roles, FSMO, Group Policy Object, GPO. IFM is for Install from Media. Knowledge Consistency Checker, KCC. Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, LDAP, LDAP. Organizational Unit, OU. Relative Identifier, RID. Security Identifier, SID. User Principal Name, UPN. I thought that's where I used to watch Friday Night SmackDown. Now check questions for Module 2. The role of a directory service. A directory service provides a centralized management tool for users and resources. True or false? True. A directory service like Active Directory allows administrators to manage user accounts and network resources from a centralized tool. Which of the following is part of the physical structure of Active Directory? Domain controllers. Domain controllers and sites are the two physical structure components of Active Directory. Installing Active Directory. When you install Active Directory on the first domain controller in the forest, the other server role should also be installed if it is not already installed on the network. A DNS server. DNS must be installed so other computers can locate domain controllers and other domain resources. You have an Active Directory forest that consists of a single domain named mydomain.port. You install Active Directory on another server and create a new domain in the mydomain.port forest named another domain.core. Which of the following is true about another domain.port? It is a new tree. Each domain in a forest that does not share the first and second level domain name is considered a separate tree in the forest. What's inside Active Directory? Which Active Directory management tool is built on PowerShell? Active Directory Administrative Center, ADAC. Active Directory Administrative Center is built on PowerShell. Each task you perform executes one or more PowerShell commandlets, CMD, LETS, commandlets, to execute the task. Which of the following is the name of a default organizational unit? Domain controllers. Domain controller is the only default OU created when Active Directory is installed. It contains the DC computer account, working with forests, trees, and domains. What process is responsible for determining the replication topology between DCs? The Knowledge Consistency Checker, the KCC. The Knowledge Consistency Checker communicates with other DCs to determine the best replication topology among DCs in a domain. Which of the following is true about forests? All domains in a forest share a single schema. The schema determines the types of objects and object attributes for all domains in the forest. Which of the following is the name of a default GPO? Default Domain Controllers Policy. The two default GPOs created when Active Directory is installed are Default Domain Controllers Policy and Default Domain Policy. Which GPO is applied last and therefore takes precedence if there is a conflict? GPO linked to an organizational unit. The group in the order in which group policy organizations or group policy orders are applied is local, site, domain, and OU. The last GPO applied takes precedence when there is a conflict. All right, we are on to Module 3, which is an absolute bear. It is Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 put together with a bunch of sales and nonsense. Good luck. Module Summary for Module 3, Manage Active Directory Accounts. Organizational units, the building blocks of the Active Directory structure in a domain, can be designed to mirror a company's organizational chart. Delegation of control can be used to give certain users some management authority in an organizational unit. You need to be familiar with organizational unit permissions and permission inheritance to understand delegation of control. OU permissions and permissions inheritance work much the same way as they do in the file system. You must enable the Active Advanced Features option in Active Directory Users and Computers, ADUC, to view an object security tab and other folders and tabs. User accounts provide a way for users to authenticate to the network and contain user information that can be used in a company directory. There are three categories of users in Windows: local, domain, and built-in. The two built-in accounts are administrator and guest. ADUC, Active Directory Users and Computers, and Active Directory Administrative Center, ADAC, are GUI graphical user interface tools for creating and maintaining user accounts. User account names must be unique in a domain. are case sensitive and must be 20 or fewer characters. A complex password is required by default. The naming standard should be devised before creating user accounts. At the very least, the user's full name, login name, and password are required to create a user account in ADUC. This module covers the user account properties in the General Account Profile and Member of tabs. The Account tab contains information that controls many aspects of logging onto the domain, such as login name, logon hours, logon locations, account lockout, and account expiration. The Profile tab contains information about where a user's profile data is stored and can specify a logon script. The member of tab lists groups the user belongs to and can be used to change group memberships. Each new user is added to the domain users group automatically. Groups are the main security principle used to grant rights and permissions. The two group types are security and distribution, but only security groups are used to assign the permissions and rights. The group type can be converted from security to distribution and vice versa. The group scope determines the reach of a group's application in a domain or a forest, which security principles in a forest can be group members, and to which forest resources a group can be assigned rights or permissions. There are three group scopes in Active Directory: domain local, global, and universal. Local groups are found on domain member computers and standalone computers. Recommended use of groups can be summarized with the acronyms AGDLP and AGGUDLP. Groups can be nested as long as the rules for group membership are followed. Group scope can be converted with some restrictions. There are default groups in the bulletin and users folders, and there are specialty identity groups with dynamic membership that can't be managed. I'm going to try to find the breakdown at golf. No, 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 Woo. Okay, AGDLP is an unnecessary shorthand for accounts are made members of global groups, which are made members of domain local groups, which are assigned permissions to resources. In multi-domain environments where users from different domains are assigned access to a resource, use AGGUDLP. Accounts are made members of global groups, which, when necessary, are nested in other global groups, which are made members of universal groups, which are then made members of domain local groups, which are assigned permissions to resources. Computers that are domain members have computer accounts in Active Directory in Active Directory. The main users logging on to member computers can use single sign-on forest-wide and perform Active Directory searches. Computers can be managed by using group policies and remote MMCs. Computer accounts are created automatically when a computer joins a domain or manually by an administrator. By default, computer accounts are created in the Computers folder, but to use group policies, they must be moved to an OU that has a group policy linked to it. Computer accounts can be deleted or disabled, just as user accounts can be. When a computer leaves the domain, its associated computer account is disabled automatically. If the same computer rejoins the domain, the account is enabled again. When the computer needs access to the domain again, you can re-enable the computer account. A service account is a user account that Windows services use to log on with a specific set of rights and permissions. A service needs to log on with a service account if it runs in the background because a user doesn't start it. A managed service account enables administrators to manage rights and permissions for services with automatic password management. A group managed service account provides the same functions but can be managed across multiple servers. There are three built-in service accounts, each with its own rights and permissions: local service, network service, and local system. The advantage of using a built-in service account is that no management is needed and the password is managed automatically. Virtual accounts are the simplest service accounts to use because you don't need to create, delete, or manage them in any way. Microsoft refers to them as managed local accounts. They access the network with the credentials of the computer account where they're used. Kerberos delegation is a feature of the Kerberos authentication protocol that allows a service to impersonate a client, relieving the client from having to authenticate to more than one service. Kerberos delegation is available when you use a domain account as a service account and the account has been assigned an SPN. Azure AD is primarily used for authenticating users who want to access Azure cloud resources such as Microsoft 365, cloud storage, and even third-party cloud applications. Azure AD is called a multi-tenant service because all the accounts stored in the Azure AD from all Azure customers part of one very large directory managed by Microsoft. Azure AD Connect is a tool that you will install on an on-premises Windows Active Directory domain member or domain controller, and that synchronizes active Windows Active Directory users, groups, and contacts with Azure AD. Self-service password reset, SSPR, is an Azure AD feature that allows Azure users who have accounts in Azure AD to reset or change their password and unlock their account without intervention from an administrator. You can monitor the health of Azure AD Connect by going there and clicking the Azure AD Connect Health link under Health and Analytics. From the resulting page, you can check for sync errors, verify the status of related services, and configure settings. Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync is a more lightweight version of Azure AD Connect Sync because the configuration and provisioning information is done in the cloud rather than primarily on the on-premises servers. Azure AD Domain Services takes Azure AD one step further and implements many of the features of on-premises Active Directory, including organizational units and group policies. Whereas Azure AD is primarily an identity service, Azure ADDS is the right choice when you want many of the same capabilities of on-premises Active Directory in the cloud. Solutions to self-check questions. Working with organizational units. An organizational unit is a security principle that can be used to assign resource permissions to user and computer accounts in the organizational unit. True or false? False. An OU is not a security principle. It cannot be used to assign permissions or rights to accounts. A security group is used for the purpose. How can a user that is only a member of the domain users group get permission to create and change accounts in an OU? Delegate control. User accounts with administrative permissions to an OU can delegate control of the OU to another user account, which confers selected permissions to the OU to the delegated user account. Managing user accounts. Where are user accounts stored after they are created on a Windows 11 computer? SAM database. User and group accounts on a standalone or member Windows computer are stored in the Security Accounts Manager database. Which of the following is true about the default administrator account on a Windows domain member computer? It can be renamed. The built-in administrator and guest accounts can be disabled and renamed, but they cannot be deleted. Which of the following is not a group scope found on a domain controller? Forest local. Valid group scopes on a domain controller are universal, global, and domain local. Member computers and standalone computers have local groups. Which of the following is the acronym used to describe best practices for using groups and assigning permissions in a multi-domain forest? It's that AGGULP. AGGUDLP. Best practices for using groups and assigning permissions in a multi-domain environment can be summarized as accounts are members of global groups and nest global groups in other global groups if necessary. Global groups are members of universal groups if necessary, and universal groups are members of domain local groups. Finally, permissions to resources are assigned to domain local groups. AGGULUDLD. Note that the use of universal groups is not always necessary, so global groups would be made members of domain local groups. Working with computer accounts. What command is used to change the default location for computer accounts created when the computer joins the domain? The command is redircmp, redircmp. Use redircmp to change the default location for computer accounts created during a domain join. The syntax is redirect mp ou member computers bc csm tech bc port. Computer accounts that are created by a domain join can be disabled. True or false? True. Computer accounts can be disabled using Active Directory users and computers by right-clicking the account and clicking Disable. Doesn't matter how the account was created. Working with service accounts. Which of the following is not a built-in service account? Network system. The three built-in service accounts are local service, network service, and local system. When which managed account type is created by specifying NT service name as the login account for the service. Virtual. Virtual accounts are created when you configure a service's login account with the name ntservice/service name, where service name is the name of the service. Using Active Directory in a hybrid environment. Azure Active Directory supports group policy. True or false? False. Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, does not support group policy. However, Azure Active Directory Domain Services, Azure ADDS, does support group policy. Which feature in Azure requires at least an Azure Premium T1 level subscription? Dynamic Groups. Dynamic Groups, a feature that adds accounts to groups based on rules an administrator creates, and only available with at least an Azure Premium T1 level subscription. The other features are available with a basic or trial subscription. Cost nothing. All right, we got that. I don't know how well I'm going to do tomorrow.